Hello, Steve from F1MOTO. Today we're going to talk about fitting a VHM cylinder head and power valve adjuster assembly to a KTM 65 09 to current 18 model. So the components that we're going to be fitting are the billet cylinder head, the combustion chamber insert for the cylinder head, the power valve bowl and the power valve adjuster. And included in that assembly is the diaphragm, the spring holder and spring. So here we have our KTM 65 engine, as you can see, totally standard top end assembly. So first thing to do is to disassemble the components we don't need. Starting with the power valve, we remove the power valve cap via the three 6mm headed screws. So that's the cap removed. So next you'll see we have the KTM diaphragm retained by its nylock nut. So we need to remove that nut to remove the diaphragm. We do this by pulling the assembly up, and there's a 6mm flat on the shaft. Be sure to hold that with a spanner so it doesn't damage the power valve joint at the bottom, and then we undo the lock nut. Then we can remove the diaphragm, and that will reveal the power valve bowl screws. So we've got a 5mm socket cap head screw here and a 4mm socket head cap screw there. So we need to remove those. Just as a matter of preference, I normally start with the 4mm. On the smaller one there's a little copper washer underneath as a sealing washer. Be sure not to lose that. You can see there the little sealing washer. And then the bigger one of the two. Again, this has a copper sealing washer underneath it as well, so be sure to retain those. And then the power valve bowl is free to remove. You'll see next we have our power valve spring coming off, so we'll use that fellow in a moment. So the only thing now left to do is to remove the cylinder head. At this stage there's just the four 10mm headed screws. Usually loosen those, just crack them in a diagonal pattern once the tension is off, and we can wind them all the way out. Again, the cylinder head bolts have copper sealing washers under the heads, so be sure to retain all of those. So now we're free to remove the cylinder head. That's the KTM cylinder head. One thing you will notice, the dowel has come out with the head, so just a pair of pliers should pull that out. You see that comes out nice and easy. So be sure just to pop him back in the original location. So you can see we've got our two dowels in place for next time we replace the cylinder head. So now just pull out the power valve assembly, just have a good look around it, especially the joint here. This particular example is a heavy duty Nihilo one, which we also sell. These are a really good idea, adds to reliability, good solid unit. So then simply just give it the top of the cylinder a wipe off. Make sure the sealing O-ring is in good condition. Pop the power valve back in. Now we come to fit the VHM cylinder head. So the VHM cylinder head, as I said, is the insert and the outer casing. So we need to make sure that our O-rings are in clean and good condition. So we've got one O-ring around the periphery of the insert there, and then one around the spoke with location. So we simply line that up with a bore on the cylinder head and just pop it in, and you see that fits in there quite nicely. So now that is ready to bolt onto the cylinder. One thing we would do at this stage normally is to check the squish clearance. The squish clearance is the distance between the piston crown at the periphery and the squish band on the cylinder head combustion chamber insert. There's a separate video on how to do that, so be sure to look that up on our YouTube channel, and that will give you some direction on how to check the squish clearance. But for this purpose we're just going to do a straightforward assembly job. So again, make sure the faces are all nice and clean. Then we pop that over the power valve, locate it onto the dowels, and you see that's just a nice firm fit. So then we fit the cylinder head bolts again, ensuring our copper washers are in place. And then wind the bolts down. Again, just a light tension just to nip the head down to start with. So then just a little bit firmer pressure. And finally we would torque those down to the KTM recommended torque with a torque wrench, but for this purpose we'll skip that step. One thing you would have noticed, we have pulled the spring out of the bottom location as in the conventional KTM setup. This is intentional because the spring gets moved above the diaphragm so that we can adjust the preload on the spring. Hopefully that will become clearer as we complete the assembly. At this stage what you want to notice is that you've got two small O-rings in the power valve operating chambers, obviously for sealing the power valve base. This is not part of the VHM assembly. You can either take them out of the original cylinder head, they're the very same O-ring, or we do stock those, so again give us a call and we can supply those, no problem at all. So next part is the power valve base. Again, make sure it's got the O-ring around the spigot there. That does come with the assembly, so we just pop that over the power valve, align the holes, and then get our two screws, again with the copper sealing washers, fit them into place. Wind them down. And then just a good firm nip is all they really require. So make sure our power valve moves freely once we've got to that point in the assembly, which as you can see it does. So no problems there with the assembly. The next thing is the diaphragm. Uses the original KTM diaphragm, so we pop that over the power valve shaft. And instead of using the nylock nut, we use the VHM spring holder, which is a small aluminium top hat piece, and you can see the 5mm thread in the end. It also has a O-ring around the larger diameter. This acts as a bit of a damper at full valve travel, so it's not surplus to requirements. It's there for a purpose, so we make sure that that's still there. We screw him onto the top of the power valve, and then again we hold the power valve shaft with our 6mm spanner, and then with an 11mm one we tighten the spring retainer. So that's all it needs, is a reasonably firm nip. So make sure the bead of the diaphragm is located around the rim of the power valve base, and then we take our cap and our spring. The VHM springs are a progressive spring, so you can see there's tighter coils and looser coils. The tighter coils face the holder, so we place the spring on its holder, and then we place the cap above the spring, locating the spring in the adjusting hole. That's the adjuster nut, more of that later. So now we take our 3 retaining screws, fit those, tighten them down, just a nice light nip. They're only small screws, they don't need to be too tight. So now that really completes the assembly. We would probably check the adjustment on that screw. Once you buy parts from us, we can give you all the specifications you need for that. So depending upon exhaust and carburetors, we can tell you what would be a good baseline setting. This, as you can see here, this hex just winds in and out on a screw thread. So we're basically adjusting the amount of tension we're putting on that progressive spring we talked about earlier. Now, that's inherently the job done, but a point of note should be the power valve adjuster top itself also fits the standard KTM parts, and as far as KTM performance go, that is a must-have component. Power valve adjustment and springs has a huge influence over carburation, especially a low to mid-range. So that would be one of the very, very first things I would recommend for any KTM owner and rider of any ability. If you need any more further info, be sure to either send us an email or give us a call. F1MOTO 02 4631 2599.